questions, you can choose to do this anonymously. There will be 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So again, use the Q&A feature for any questions. You can please use the chat for general comments or technical issues. My colleague Rebecca is here to monitor the chat for any questions and comments, and she's dropping some links in the chat as well. So she's adding those links into the chat. One is for collaborative resource sharing. If you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us in COM's recommended resources shared Zotero. And there is another link to the conference code of conduct. And I believe with that, I'm going to turn things over to our presenters. So y'all take it away.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Arlene Weismantel from the MSU Libraries, and our presentation today is From 14 Ratings to 4, Engaging Faculty in Streamlining the Annual Evaluation Process. This is who we are. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Scholarly Communications and Faculty Affairs. And my co-presenters are going to introduce themselves as their section approaches. So first, I want to provide you with some background. So over the years, librarians have expressed concern about our annual evaluation process, that it's too long, too cumbersome, difficult to understand, and so forth. And even though there were many discussions about how to change it over the years, nothing really happened until the fall of 2019, when the Dean of Libraries convened the Faculty Performance Evaluation Task Force, and they issued a final report in November of 2020. So some of the questions the task force had consisted of: what is the most constructive way to give feedback to newer librarians? How can our word ratings be standardized? And what is the best way to achieve greater interrelator reliability? The problem there is that many of our supervisors, some had reputations for being hard graders, and some had reputations for being easy graders, and we wanted to eliminate some of that variability. MSU requires a merit-based raise system. How do we work fairly and equitably within the system for our own raise process? Some of what the task force recommended included focusing on growth and development of librarians and fostering openness, positivity, and collaboration in the annual evaluation process, encouraging librarian growth, specifically recommending changes to DEIA requirements, standardizing the format for both position descriptions and goals, which were included in the annual evaluation packet, and using SMART goals whenever possible. I know many of you are probably already aware of SMART goals, so goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based, and to use fewer word ratings in our annual evaluation process. Next, we're going to talk about engaging the library faculty.
Thanks, Arlene. Hi, everybody. I'm Joshua Sanchez, and I lead our user experience and web services teams here at MSU Libraries. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about the way that we approach this work by engaging with our library faculty. So from the outset, one of the priorities of this project was not only to redesign the evaluation system, but to do it by including and engaging our users of the evaluation system as much as we could. So as a user experience person, this is very much a core value of mine in my daily work. And so I was really happy to see us have this as one of the focus areas of this project. So throughout this process, we did everything we could to do our work in an open and collaborative way. This includes engagement with faculty in every one of our 5 major divisions at the libraries and all of the units within those divisions. We also included members of our faculty from different backgrounds and different experiences, and perhaps most crucially, from different stages of their career. And this includes everyone from our newest librarians who are just starting out to our well-established librarians who've long completed the continuing appointment process and are maybe in their later stages of their careers. So this really allowed us to confidently say that we redesigned the system and that it is built by us and then for us. And so by doing so in an engaged and collaborative way, we really were able to generate a fair amount of excitement and support for the new system for this change, and ultimately provided a much needed boost to the way that we experience and really feel about this process. Okay, so what does this process look like? In 2020, we released an initial draft report that included recommendations for creating the new system. The report was based heavily on our user engagement. This includes surveys, individual interviews that we conducted, open conversations with our faculty body. Along the way, we also completed benchmarking activities from some of our peer institutions, and we did a lot of reading on HR and management research, as well as some of the best practices for systems like this. This report was presented to our library's steering committee for feedback, and then ultimately presented to all of our library faculty at one of our library faculty assembly meetings. Okay, the result of that feedback led to the committee that you're looking at today, drafting changes to the librarian handbook, and we will go into that in a little bit more detail in a bit. The handbook changes and recommendations were shared with all of our library faculty at 2 additional assembly meetings, and that gave our faculty another avenue for engaging with these proposed changes, providing feedback and recommendations. And in addition, the draft documents for the handbook changes were made open and available for all of our faculty to provide their feedback. We really did open this up for everyone to be involved on a very large scale or a very small scale if they wanted to. So you'll see in this screenshot that chapter 3 of the handbook alone received more than 245 comments and suggested edits. This included high-level feedback about the process as a whole, down to people editing specific wording and even punctuation and spacing, things like that. Really cool to see this level of engagement, and as you can imagine, also a little bit overwhelming when you're doing it in one shared Google document all at the same time. Okay, so overall, I think our approach was a pretty successful one. We received a lot of positive responses on our engagement efforts, and simply by opening up our work to our faculty body, we received countless ideas, suggestions for improvements, edits, corrections, and points that needed clarification. Is our new and improved evaluation process perfect? Probably not. I don't know that any evaluation system is. But all of our feedback that we've received thus far indicates that we've really been able to make some significant and meaningful improvements to the system, and that's really been great to see.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Morningstar, and I'm the Organizational Development Coordinator at MSU. So the first step in creating an effective evaluation process is really looking at creating more attainable and achievable goals for our librarians each year. And that also resulted in creating more robust job descriptions as well. So previously, our previous goals format, they were broken down by what we called continuing and specific objectives. And so a librarian would have a goal, and then they would have some maybe 2 or 3 continuing objectives in that goal, and then more specific objectives and how they would go about achieving that goal that year. Librarians could have any number of goals and objectives per year. We initially had no page limits when it came to this as well. We did eventually ask for some page limits, but we found that that didn't really alleviate some of the problems that we were having either. And another aspect of our previous format is that our goals, we asked folks to annotate their goals at the end of the year as part of their self-evaluation packet. And the information provided in those goals were often redundant to the previous sections. So we already had a pretty robust section for talking about what you accomplished in your job that year, in your scholarly and creative activities, and your professional service. And the annotated goals ended up being a lot of that same information. So on the next slide, you'll see we have an example. This is Emilia's goals from 2018. And as you can see here, she has 5 pages. These are unannotated goals with 8 different goals and 39 total objectives. And so this was very typical of our librarians. And this is really just what it looked like previously. And so our goals and continuing objectives were often copied and pasted from previous years. New goals were not often added in. Sometimes you would have more specific objectives or newer specific objectives for a year, but for the most part, the goals and continuing objectives stayed the same. And looking at our job descriptions, those were often pulled from our job postings. And so they were basically just that one kind of function paragraph that we now see as a brief overview of position descriptions. That used to be the entire job description. And because there were a lot of pages, there was a lot of redundant information, our Faculty Affairs Committee, who reviews and reads every single evaluation, they just flat out said, we don't look at these annotated goals anymore. It's a lot of extra paperwork and it's mostly the same information. And so we voted on and decided to remove annotated goals from the evaluation packet in 2017. Of course, that led to questions of why do we even have these goals anymore if they aren't going to be a part of an official process? And that was something that our committee, this parent committee, we had thought we talked about that too. If you go to the next slide, we asked that very question. As one of the first things that we talked about was, do we need goals? And if we do have them, how do we make them useful? And we knew that we needed to have these goals to help guide our work. And so one of the first steps in creating these new SMART goals was to actually create more robust job descriptions. And so that meant moving many of our goals and those continuing objectives up into the job description. So in addition to that function paragraph, librarians now have more specific job characteristics and responsibilities in their job description. For some, I know myself included in my previous role in the library as a liaison, that moved my entire goals and continuing objectives section up into my job description. And so that was kind of unsettling. You're not really sure of what your new goals are going to look like. And so Arlene and I hosted some trainings and workshops to help our librarians really kind of broaden their concepts and think outside the box on what we really mean by what this new goal format would look like. And so another aspect of these new Streamlined goals, we started using the SMART goals that Arlene mentioned earlier. We asked folks to limit their goals to 3 to 5 total per year. We think that that is very achievable. No more than that is probably unrealistic. And really importantly too, we wanted these goals to be much more intentional versus kind of the autopilot aspect of before, where it was copying and pasting our goals and objectives over from year to year. This helps build in reflection, which is really important, more intentionality, critical thinking in creating goals. We had a new strategic plan in 2019. And so how do your goals then fit that strategic plan? We also talked about unit goals and making that more uniform. And so all this together helps to create a more meaningful goal setting process for our librarians. So while we did ask for folks to create more specific goals, we did kind of broaden this concept a little bit more of what we mean by goals to areas of focus. So importantly, goals do not have to be something new. It doesn't have to be a brand new initiative. It doesn't have to be super flashy or exciting. And it's not about adding in more work. We really wanted to help curb some of the burnout that our folks were experiencing. And there was some confusion around what these goals would look like. And so again, we helped to create a bank of goals that are kind of generic so that our folks could see what it was that we were kind of looking for, and then also some action words too. And And so we have examples of what the new job description looks like. This is, I believe this is Joshua's. This might also be a template. But as you can see, we have the descriptive paragraph and then more characteristic duties and responsibilities. So there's that more robust job description. And then the individual goals from this past year. We do have goals, and then you can still have those more specific objectives added in to kind of complete the SMART goal process. And, how do you actually go about achieving these goals from year to year? These are the unannotated versions. And so we asked folks to limit the annotated goals to up to 3 pages. And then you can also see where we added in tying your goals into the strategic plan. This last page here shows just these example goals that we kind of helped create for folks, really to hopefully inspire them to think more about those specific areas of focus. Again, not necessarily doing something brand new or adding in more work, but how do you take your job description and the priorities of the institution and create intentional, achievable, meaningful goals from year to year? And we provided a lot of support, and so far I think that process went very well.
Thank you, Jill. Next, I'm going to be talking about reducing the number of ratings that were used in our performance evaluation. In our old system, 14 ratings were used. One of the major problems with having 14 ratings was that only a few of them were actually defined for people in our handbook. Only 5 of them, as a matter of fact. So even though there are 14 here, only excellent, very good, satisfactory, and unacceptable were actually defined for people. And needless to say, this led to quite a number of problems. So it produced low inter-rater reliability. There was quite a bit of variation between supervisors, and we felt that that really led to unfairness and inconsistency. And there was a relationship between these word ratings and the ability of people to achieve reappointment or continuing appointment in our tenure-like process. So we revised our word ratings down to 4. Exceeds expectations, meets, approaching expectation, and does not meet expectations. One of the other things that we also tried to do in this process is to get people to think a little bit more about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility as they were, doing their jobs. So our provost's office had some requirements for this. From the provost in November of 2022, they stated that all faculty are encouraged to play a proactive role in learning about, contributing to, and supporting to MSU's institutional goals for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they also wanted people to acknowledge, evaluate, and recognize in the reappointment, promotion, and continuing appointment process and in annual reviews of DEI issues. One of the ways that we chose to address that is in our handbook section on knowledge, skills, and abilities. So librarians are required to develop knowledge, skills, and abilities, and those are listed in our librarian handbook. Some of those include knowledge and background relevant to the librarian's position, effectiveness in working with others, and the ability to identify, analyze, and solve problems, and make good decisions. So we chose to address the DEIA issue by adding the following knowledge, skills, and abilities. So the overarching one is demonstrated sensitivity to and interest in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And some of the ways that librarians can incorporate that into their work is to incorporate it into job responsibilities and goals, to demonstrate awareness of DEIA factors in solving problems, to participate in DEIA-focused professional development, to consider DEIA goals when hiring student employees, to create an accessible and encouraging environment to all, engaging respectfully with difficult and sensitive subject matter. When teaching, to employ pedagogy that meets the needs of students from all backgrounds, learning styles, and abilities, and to include resources authored by minoritized authors. Also to consider accessibility when creating websites, handouts, and other documents. To make scholarly and creative contributions that promote an understanding of minoritized communities, and to serve on committees with a DEIA focus, and to incorporate DEIA principles into committee work.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how things are going now that we've implemented some of these changes. So my name is Emilia Marcyk, and I'm the head of reference and discovery services at the MSU libraries. So I'm going to go through kind of a couple of comparative examples of like what our process looked like before these changes were implemented, and then kind of what it looks like now, so you can get a sense of how things are going, basically. So essentially, I'm going to give a little context here. So in the MSU libraries, many people have both a primary and a secondary appointment. So essentially, your primary appointment is what you got hired to do, and that's 75% of your job. And then your secondary appointment is 25% of your job in a separate unit or a related area in the library. So for example, so I, as the head of reference, I supervise a bunch of 25% secondary appointments, because all of our librarians who do reference are a 25% appointment, in addition to the kind of main area of their job, which might be in as a liaison, it might be as one of our teaching and learning librarians, it might be as a metadata librarian. So that's a little bit about what this primary and secondary evaluation. So there's two kind of pieces to the evaluation. So in our previous process, we had a long narrative section for the primary evaluation. And then for anyone who was pre-continuous appointment, so the first 6 years of employment in the libraries, those librarians were also evaluated under each section for the knowledge, skills, and abilities. So that was, the long narrative was 4+ pages. So the knowledge, skills, and abilities was 3+ pages. Now how we have things set up is that every librarian is evaluated on knowledge, skills, and abilities, because it didn't really make sense that we would only be evaluating people before they got continuous appointment on things we expect for all librarians. And we've also limited to 2 to 3 sentences per each area. And so I've got some visual representations on the next slide. So this is, again, one of my evaluations from 2018. This is just basically to show just like how dense this was. There's this big, long narrative section. And then if we go to the next slide, then there was also these 3 pages, and I've called this out in like horrible red word art because this was all duplicate information. Basically, my supervisor at the time had to go through and basically pull out content from the narrative that he'd written and kind of tie it into the different knowledge, skills, and abilities, but it wasn't really new information or really adding much to the evaluation. Next slide. Okay, so here's a little preview, I guess, of what our current form looks like. So essentially each primary supervisor will write a short narrative of approximately 300 words that addresses the librarian's performance related to their job duties and their annual goals as outlined in their job description and the goals document. And then there is one section for each of the knowledge, skills, and abilities, kind of the large category. And then there's supposed to be a 2 to 3 sentence description for each. And you'll notice too that there's these little check boxes that where the supervisor can select exceeds, meets, approaching, and does not meet for each of the criteria as well. So it's very nice. We don't have to say that Emilia has a low excellent understanding of background and knowledge relevant to the position, because what does that mean? Okay, next slide. And then this is my particular area of concern because I am, like I said, I'm mostly a secondary supervisor of librarians. And so how we used to do this in the former system, so again, for pre-continuously appointed librarians, so again, the first 6 years, there was kind of what we call the formal secondary evaluation that was incorporated into the merit raise packet. And it was a little stressful for me in doing this because I had to kind of assign one of these 14 poorly defined word rankings. And this essentially hasn't changed. We're still incorporating that evaluation into the merit raise packet, but I find the assigning one of the 4 ratings a lot less stressful. Where the big change has been is for our continuously appointed librarians. So if you can go to the next slide. In our previous system, for whatever reason, the secondary evaluation was not included in the merit raise packet that went forward to the Faculty Affairs Committee. And the feedback, so I would essentially write like a fairly informal, maybe paragraph evaluation of the librarian's work in my unit for that year. And then that would be incorporated sometimes somewhat haphazardly or sometimes not at all by the primary supervisor into the evaluation, or often it would be incorporated as like a single sentence, like, you know, this librarian did excellent work in reference, or like they continued to staff the reference desk. And that's, you know, frustrating for me because this is 25% of their time that they're working in this unit. And it didn't really allow much room for me to highlight the excellent work that a lot of the folks were doing. So now in this new system, we have the secondary evaluation as part of that merit raise packet. I don't assign a rating, but it does give me that opportunity to highlight the work that the folks in my unit are doing throughout the year, rather than just have it be a throwaway sentence as part of a larger narrative.
All right. And I'm like laughing to myself while I'm listening to all my colleagues talk. I'm Rachel Minkin, and I'm the Interim Associate Dean for Teaching, Learning, and Research. And I'm laughing because I came up through this system, and to me, it all seemed very, very normal until we switched it. And now I'm looking back and like, wow, some of that really was ridiculous. So thank you to my colleagues for making this so clear, because now watching this again, it just makes me laugh even more. So Emilia, thank you. And I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing and hearing now that we're through the evaluation process. There's more to come, and Emilia's going to come back and talk more about that in a little bit. But in my role, it's an administrative role, and so I have a large division that has a vast array of library units. So branch coordination, reference and discovery services, ed tech comes to me as a secondary, digital scholarship, data services, faculty engagement, which is all of our liaisons and our information and teaching and learning librarians, project management, and collection strategy. So a wide array. And so across the 35 or so evaluations that I'm not writing 35 evaluations, but the 35 evaluations or so that I see in my administrative role, I can actually verify that reduced rankings did in fact increase our inter-rater reliability. It is so much better to be able to say that this person is not a hard grader and this person is a pushover as far as supervisors. And Arlene, you absolutely nailed that. We did have a long tendency, a long tradition in this building of knowing who rated or ranked or graded hard and who was a softie. Clear language is separating meets from exceeds expectations. And by focusing on these elements of our librarian knowledge, of their skills and their abilities, we've really evened out those rankings. It's normed. It normed itself in some ways. And additionally, I'm seeing less filler words on an evaluation. So I don't know if it's because we had a page limit or there was no page limit, but there was this tendency to verbosity where we wanted to put as many descriptive words in there as we could. As soon as you put in a word limit or a line limit, those evaluations were less, she's a good egg, and much more considers accessibility when creating websites, right? So we really saw that sort of targeted evaluative material. For me personally, I'm going to echo what my colleagues have said. Writing these evaluations was easier this year, the ones that I do write. I didn't have to repeat myself in multiple sections across multiple pages. I've spent an inordinate amount of time in the past with an actual for real print thesaurus, trying to figure out new words to say like, does good. And instead now I was able to focus on the actual content. What things do I want to say about this person? Emilia, you had used the word highlight, and that's really it. How do I highlight the work that this librarian is doing without having to worry about how many pages? Anecdotally, I'm hearing the same from other supervisors as well. So I believe Jill used the word positive, and it is positive, which is remarkable in itself. Put 3 librarians in a room and get 4 opinions. This is a remarkably positive, forward-focused, ranging from, yeah, no, it's good, to the new system seems to be working with positive intent. But I don't get reviewed under this system. So I do want to turn it back over to Emilia to discuss more about what is it like to be reviewed under this system.
Yeah, so there's a couple of us on this presentation who are reviewed under the system. So if you're curious about other people's impressions, I guess you can ask in the Q&A or in the chat. But so this is my perspective as a reviewee, I guess, this year. And this is totally outing myself as an overachiever, but something about the language of meets expectations for those of us who are used to being like very good or excellent or whatever it is, or getting A's or whatever it is that we've been conditioned to since childhood. This is a little bit hard to readjust thinking about, okay, so meeting expectations is actually what we want people to be doing on a yearly basis. If you're continuously exceeding expectations, that's a recipe for burnout. And we want our librarians to be doing their job in a way that's sustainable over a long career. And I was pretty explicit about this with the people that I evaluated too, is that, you know, talking about my own reaction to that term and then trying to normalize it for them as well, because I do still think we need some organizational culture change around this. A lot of our new librarians come in and they kind of want to hit the ground running and they want to just like achieve. And we're trying to shift the culture towards having a more sustainable pace. And so meeting expectations really is what you're aiming for. Or even in your early years approaching expectations. And that's, I think, the next one we need to tackle, right, is to destigmatize approaching expectations as well. So baby steps. In terms of the actual reading the evaluation and kind of digesting it, it was fair. I thought it was easier to read and digest. And I think one of the things I noticed too is that, so we have, we kind of how our process works is we write a self-evaluation, and then that goes to the supervisor, and then they write the annual evaluation. And in the past, I think there was a lot of kind of, because there was this kind of like giant verbose section, a lot of that content was often taken directly from my self-evaluation. And in this new format, I've noticed that there's less of that happening. So it's like really able to kind of hone in on the things that the supervisor has noticed that I've been doing, which is nice for, you know, feeling seen, and also nice for not kind of like just feeling like my work is being regurgitated into a document, which is kind of how the old system, what it led to. And again, calling this out, less duplicate information is always good. Slide. And we're hoping to talk a little bit about the impact on the merit raise process, but we're a little bit delayed this year. We were supposed to be right in the middle of deliberations this week, but we're going to be doing those later in the month. But I have a guess that we'll see if this bears out. But I am guessing that the new system of assigning word ratings will likely lead to flatter raise tiers. So in the past, we would often have it was like a traditional bell curve where you'd have like the kind of people with the receiving and the biggest raise and the highest tier there'd be like a few of those. And then you'd have maybe a few more in the second highest tier. And then in the middle, there'd be this giant lump of folks. And then you'd have sometimes one or two more on the kind of tail end on the other side of that bell curve. I think with this new system, we're going to have 4 tiers that correspond to the 4 different ratings. I'm expecting most people to be either in exceeds or meets. I mean, we'll see. I actually happen to be the chair of our faculty affairs committee, so I'm going to have a firsthand of this for this year. So I'm going to have a firsthand view kind of how this works. So I guess get in contact with me if you're curious in maybe like a month and I'll let you know. But I think overall, my personal opinion is that having a flatter raise structure is better because most people are doing good work, and it's more accurate to kind of what kind of the level of performance within the organization to have this kind of like very top heavy raise structure. So I think that's going to be a good thing, and I hope that it does pan out how I'm expecting. Okay, and then just briefly, kind of next steps. So this has been a whole process, and we're still not done. And I think we wanted to highlight that this takes a lot of time. This kind of organizational, it's not just organizational change. It's like really getting into the details and like trying not to just slap something together. We really want to, like you saw with that screenshot that Joshua shared of just like the line by line edits, because I think the documentation we had was like kind of the victim of maybe just adding things in without really thinking through like how the changes were created implications throughout our whole process. So it's been a long time, but we're still not done. But in terms of kind of immediate next steps, so we've done chapter 3 of the handbook, and now we're tackling chapter 4. Because there are some kind of cascading impacts on reappointment and the continuous appointment process. And then trying to characterize expectations for the librarians at different levels, so librarian 1, 2, and 3, and then gathering more feedback from faculty and iterating on this process. I don't think we want to be in a situation like we were before, where we had a kind of stagnant process that had been kind of like maybe some band-aids had been slapped on it to keep it functional, but we want to continue to iterate and have this be more of a living document that continues to meet the needs of our faculty.
Hey,
so that's what we have. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. We have a couple of questions, team, that came in, or a couple more that are coming in through the Q&A here. I'll start at the top. First, did you write DEIA engagement and activity into your job descriptions? And if so, what was that process like?
Yeah, so that was something that was also part of, because it became a part of how you're evaluated. And so then that also became a part of setting intentional goals. And then also as it's described in your job duties too. That was something that we integrated that into this whole process of creating more robust job descriptions and more intentional goals too. And so we had a lot of documentation that we received from MSU, from the provost office and these various committees who worked on these documentations. So we had a lot of guidelines. And so that was something that we were able to integrate into the process of creating these new job descriptions. We were kind of starting from scratch with some folks. And so that made it this was really good timing, basically, in incorporating DEIA into job descriptions and then also into our goals from year to year too.
And I think one of the persistent criticisms of like DEIA initiatives on campuses is it's like an add-on. It's not really like a integrated part of the work that we're expected to do, and then you're not rewarded for that work. And I think having the that whole section and the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we're actually being evaluated on is one attempt, and I don't know that it's a perfect attempt, but it's one attempt at rewarding people for the work that they're doing to advance DEIA in the profession on our campus and our library in a tangible way, right? So I think beyond just putting it into the job description of trying to really like connect that to as an important integral part of the work that we're all doing.
Okay, next we've got one that says, do your faculty prepare an annual report or some sort of self-evaluation that informs the supervisor eval? Yeah, the answer to that is yes. All of these supervisor evals are based on a self-evaluation form that each of our librarians fills out beforehand. So I think our evals are generally due at the beginning or second week-ish of March, and then supervisors have a couple of weeks to read and then prepare the evaluations that we talked about today.
And if anyone wants, like, I don't know if anyone cares about the exact format, but like, so basically I think like many faculty librarian jobs, like we're writing about, we call them criterion 1, 2, and 3, but it's essentially like your job duties, and then it's your scholarship and creative activities, and then it's your professional service and other things under that kind of. The self-evaluation is kind of evaluating each of those 3 areas.
And additionally, we're not just working from that one form. We are expecting that our supervisors will meet with their supervisees on a regular basis. And that may be once a week, that may be twice a month, that may be once a month, but that there is also regular contact, either face-to-face or Zoom, to keep apprised on work.
Okay, as you mentioned, constantly exceeding expectations is tied to burnout. In my organization, exceeds is implicitly encouraged as it has been tied to monetary merit awards. So how would we as a team approach fixing this?
Yeah, well, I would say that to a certain extent, this is still part of our culture. And as Emilia said earlier, we really need to try to normalize that meeting expectations is in fact the goal, right? And sometimes you may have an outstanding year, but having an outstanding year every year is not really good for anyone's psychological health.
I think another thing related to this, and I guess we'll see how this plays out this year, is like somewhat flattening the difference between like a tier 1 and a tier 2 raise. Like, you don't, I don't know, we'll see how, it's every year. It depends on kind of what raise money exists or even getting raises. But as I'm sure many of you have experienced, but I know that in the past, one of the things that we've done is looking at like flattening that like actual amount a little bit as well, because acknowledging that meeting expectations is good, right? So you're not getting like a substantially less money for meeting expectations than you are for exceeding, and then finding other ways, I guess, to acknowledge the exceptional work that people are doing.
Okay, I love this kind of maintenance work. Thanks for sharing. Regarding expectations, was there any discussion of whose expectations they were? That is, a faculty member's expectations for themselves versus a supervisor's expectations of their direct reports versus some other faculty's expectations of their peers?
Yeah, there was some discussion of this. So the goals at the beginning of the year are collaboratively arrived at by the supervisor and the supervisee, right? So that's kind of where the expectations come from. And then it's the supervisor largely that's assigning those ratings. And then it's the faculty affairs committee that is reviewing all of the evaluations and potentially normalizing any odd ratings that they determine by getting a look at all of the evaluations as a whole. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I would add also that, and I think it touches a little bit on what Emilia was saying earlier about being an A+ student. There are some internal expectations around what a good evaluation looks like. And sometimes it's hard to remember that this is an evaluation of work. This is a professional thing, not a evaluation of you as a human being. And so those expectations do sort of seep in there sometimes anyway.
Yeah.
So I think another thing that we went kind of back and forth on, and I think we eventually landed on this, is like for criterion 2 and 3, which are maybe a little bit more quantifiable, like to what degree do we quantify those? Because our general impression was most people were, especially new librarians, were doing a lot of criterion 2, so like a lot of scholarly activities, a lot of criterion 3. Like I was just talking to someone I supervised who's like on 9 different committees, and like we don't want to encourage that level of like we don't want people to think that they have to do that to meet expectations, but then it's also hard to like, because then you get into kind of like, well, if you're on 3 committees and you're really involved in them versus 3 committees and you're like not really involved, you're just attending meetings. And then, or, like, we don't necessarily want to get into like all the nuance of like, a paper counts this much. And I know a lot of libraries do that, but that's not the process that we've ever had here. But we did do a little bit of quantifying, I guess, of what is meeting and exceeding expectations in terms of quantity and quality and depth, I guess, because we really wanted to emphasize depth and as well as quantity in those 2 areas, because sometimes it's easy to just say like, well, I did 14 presentations, so that's but maybe they were all this, you just got lucky that year and they were all the same essential presentation, and then so you want to not just look at quantity, but we also don't want to encourage like just doing things for the sake of doing them. Which I fully realize is like kind of it's a luxury that we have that I know not all of our like faculty colleagues have. I know a lot of places have more kind of strict tenure requirements, or like assigning points to like a peer-reviewed article versus a conference presentation versus so I feel very lucky that we don't have that pressure.
Okay, what about library staff? Do they have a similar process in place? Or can we talk more about what the staff reviews entail? Okay, yeah, I'll try. The staff evaluation process is very streamlined, kind of university-wide, and so it's very different across. Very different from what we do as library faculty, where we had the kind of freedom to craft our own system within, some MSU guidelines. Our staff members have a very kind of standardized system across all staff from the university. If somebody else wants to jump in, I can try and find the website that points you to kind of how that process is laid out.
I will say we took the 4 word ratings from the staff evaluation system, though. So, but yeah, I mean, I do supervise several staff members, and yeah, it's much more it's much more streamlined, and the kind of process for staff setting goals is also very kind of formalized. But one of the things I like about that process is like you're supposed to identify kind of goals in both your job growth and also in your professional development, but then you also kind of identify like the time and resources that you need to be completed to complete that goal. And that's really useful for the supervisor and the person being supervised to really hash that out. So that's something that I don't know that we've adopted it for librarians, but it's definitely like in the back of my head when I'm thinking about my own goals.
Okay, can we talk more about the motivation for the culture change around meets expectations?
We can talk about it. Can we get there? I don't know. So I'm guessing that this question, can we talk more about what that looks like, is how do we as a profession get to this not being an overachiever? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how much of this is tied into recurring themes of vocational awe, how much of this is tied into who ends up in these sorts of positions in the first place. We were talking in a session yesterday that there's still across librarianship, it's still a very feminized profession, but academic librarians are still, we're not as feminized as across other library professions. We still don't see a large amount of women in administrative positions in academic libraries. So all of these hundreds of years of culture of US librarianship may be playing into this, that in order to be a good librarian, you have to be the best librarian. And we may be seeing that playing out, but that would just be a guess.
Okay, regarding percentages, do you hope to equate the percentage of the evaluation with the percentage of time spent on task? So in other words, is it 25% for reference because folks spend approximately 10 hours a week on the reference desk?
Yes, that's what we try to do. For reference, it's a little easier. You can kind of track it by hours that are spent on the desk, right? But there are also people who have additional tasks in reference, scheduling and so forth. I don't know if that's still the case, Emilia, but I would imagine that it is. It can be a little more difficult where there isn't a desk to be scheduled. It's a little more difficult to track the number of hours that people are spending on their second assignment, but that is the secondary assignment, but that is the hope, that it does reflect the amount of time that is spent on task. And some people do have secondary assignments that may only be 10% of their job, or might be 40% of their job.
Okay, in documentation, how can we account for failure to exceed when no equitable baseline can exist for all of the employees? So how do you remove meritocracy and deficit thinking from the merit processes?
I think this is kind of a challenging question. I think that nobody really wants to be evaluated, right? I mean, there are requirements by the university that we are, and I do think there are inherent issues with any sort of evaluation process. Hopefully that we tried to make it a little bit better than it was. But I don't by any means think that we have removed meritocracy and deficit thinking. Hopefully we've made an incremental improvement. Anybody else want to add to that?
I mean, I think that's the $1 million question, right? That we were like kind of grappling with even in the initial charge of like the committee that preceded ours is like, how do we be as equitable as possible within the system that's inherently inequitable? And I don't know that we've solved it. So if anyone else has solved it, let us know. I think we'd love to talk to you.
Okay, and last, how are secondary evaluators chosen? Tina responded that it's in the handbook, but yeah, so essentially when you agree on having a secondary assignment, whoever is supervising you in that secondary assignment will be the ones who are evaluating you for that performance. So it's like having, you know, 2 supervisors, I guess, one for each assignment that you've got.
And with that, I think we ended on perfect time. I hope everybody will join me in giving our presenters another virtual round of applause. Great job, everybody. I'm also back to remind you all about session evaluations. You can find links to session evaluations on Sched. I'm sure our presenters would appreciate hearing your feedback and your thoughts. And I hope to see people in about 15 minutes for the mid-conference keynote. Enjoy day 3 of CALM, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.